The Atlanta International Airport was busy that Tuesday afternoon. Special Agent Marcus Thompson walked through the crowded terminal, pulling his small black suitcase behind him. He was tired but happy after finishing a successful 3-day operation that had helped catch a dangerous criminal. Now, all he wanted was to get home to Washington, D.C. and see his family. Marcus was 35 years old and had worked hard to become one of the FBI's top agents. He stood 6 feet tall and always dressed professionally. Today, he wore his favorite navy blue suit, a white shirt, and a red tie. His FBI badge was safely tucked away in his jacket pocket, as he didn't like to show it off unless necessary. As he reached Gate B7, Marcus checked his phone. He had a message from his wife Sarah. "Hope you caught your flight. Emily can't wait to show you her science project." Marcus smiled, thinking about his 10-year-old daughter. He quickly typed back, "Boarding soon. Can't wait to see it." The gate agent started calling for first-class passengers to board. Marcus had earned this first-class ticket through years of collecting airline miles during his FBI travels. He stood up, straightened his tie, and got in line. A few businessmen in expensive suits stood in front of him, and behind him was a young couple who looked like they were starting their honeymoon. "Now boarding our first-class passengers for Flight AA 237 to Washington, D.C., the gate agent announced again through the speakers. Marcus noticed how some people in the regular boarding line looked at the first-class passengers with envy. He remembered feeling the same way years ago when he was just starting his career. Walking down the jet bridge, Marcus thought about his last 3 days in Atlanta. His team had finally caught a hacker who had stolen millions of dollars from retired people's bank accounts. The criminal was now in jail, and Marcus had helped return the money to those who had lost it. It felt good to help people. That's why he had joined the FBI in the first place. The flight attendant at the plane's door greeted him with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, sir. First class is to your left." Marcus nodded politely and turned left into the first-class cabin. The cabin was nice and quiet, with only 12 large, comfortable seats. The air smelled fresh, and soft music was playing through the speakers. Marcus checked his boarding pass again. Seat 3A, a window seat. As he walked to row 3, he saw that someone was already sitting in the aisle seat. It was a middle-aged woman with perfectly styled blonde hair with light brown highlights. She wore expensive-looking clothes and had several diamond rings on her fingers. She was busy typing something on her phone and had spread her designer handbag and magazines across both seats. The woman, who looked about 50 years old, didn't look up when Marcus stopped at row 3. She just kept typing on her phone, her long pink fingernails clicking against the screen. Her shopping bags from expensive stores were blocking the way to his seat. Marcus cleared his throat politely. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in his calm, professional voice. "I believe my seat is the window seat in this row." The woman, who would soon become known across social media as Plain Karen, finally looked up from her phone. Her eyes moved slowly from Marcus's shoes up to his face, and her expression changed from annoyed to shocked, then to something that looked like anger. Several other passengers were still boarding, walking past their row. A flight attendant named Sarah Chen was helping an elderly man put his bag in the overhead bin nearby. The cabin's peaceful atmosphere was about to change dramatically. Marcus didn't know it yet, but the next few minutes would test his patience, professionalism, and dignity in ways he hadn't experienced in years. What was supposed to be a quiet flight home was about to become national news, and this moment, him standing politely by row 3, would soon be seen by millions of people on social media. The woman's perfectly lined lips curled into an unfriendly smile as she looked at her phone one last time before slowly lifting her head to fully address Marcus. The events that would unfold in the next few minutes would change both their lives forever. "There must be some mistake," Patricia Whitmore said loudly, her voice sharp enough to make nearby passengers turn their heads. She didn't move her bags or try to make space. Instead, she picked up her phone again and held it up, as if she was getting ready to record. Marcus kept his professional smile in place, even though he could already tell where this was going. He'd been in situations like this before, though usually not on a plane. "No mistake, ma'am," he said calmly, pulling out his boarding pass. "Seat 3A is my assigned seat." Patricia's face turned slightly red. She looked around the first-class cabin, catching the eyes of other passengers as if asking them to support her. Most people quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in their phones or the safety cards in front of them. "This is first class," she said even louder than before, making sure everyone could hear her. She emphasized each word as if talking to someone who couldn't understand English well. First class. These seats are very expensive. A young woman sitting across the aisle slowly pulled out her phone and started recording. She could sense that something newsworthy was about to happen. Other passengers were watching too, some with concern, others with embarrassment. Marcus took a deep breath. He'd spent years training FBI agents on how to handle difficult situations, and now he was living through a perfect example. "Yes, ma'am, I'm aware this is first class," he said, his voice still professional and calm. "Here's my boarding pass, and if you'd like, I can also show you my FBI credentials." Patricia's eyes widened at the mention of FBI, but instead of backing down, she seemed to get more agitated. She pressed the flight attendant call button repeatedly, the sharp ding echoing through the cabin. Sarah Chen, the lead flight attendant with 15 years of experience, appeared quickly. She had been watching the situation unfold and had already alerted the captain about possible trouble in first class. "How can I help?" she asked, looking between Marcus and Patricia. "There's clearly been a booking mistake," Patricia said, waving her manicured hands in the air. "I need to speak to whoever's in charge. This can't be right." She was still refusing to move her bags or make space for Marcus. Sarah looked at Marcus's boarding pass and then at Patricia. "Ma'am, this gentleman's boarding pass is correct. He is assigned to seat 3A. Could you please move your bags so he can take his seat?" Patricia started recording with her phone now, pointing it directly at Marcus and Sarah. "I want to speak to the captain," she demanded. "I paid full price for first class. I'm a platinum member of this airline." Her voice was getting higher with each word. An older man in row 2 turned around. He had gray hair and a kind face, and later they would learn he was a retired judge named Robert Martinez. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "I can hear what you're saying, and I want you to know that everyone here can see exactly what you're doing. This gentleman has every right to his seat." But Patricia wasn't finished. She started typing furiously on her phone while still recording. "I'm calling my lawyer right now," she announced. "And I'm posting this online. My friends in high places will hear about this. Do you know who I am? I'm the vice president of sales at—" Marcus stood quietly, his hands clasped in front of him. His FBI training had taught him that sometimes the best response was no response at all. He watched as Patricia continued her rant, noticing how other passengers were now openly recording the scene. Sarah Chen stepped away briefly to talk into her radio, speaking quietly but urgently to the captain. 2 more flight attendants appeared at the end of the aisle, ready to help if needed. The boarding process for other passengers had completely stopped. Patricia's face was now bright red as she continued recording and typing. "This is completely unacceptable," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "I demand to see his ticket again, and his ID, and those FBI credentials he claims to have. This is first class, and I have certain expectations about—" She didn't finish her sentence because at that moment, a new voice came over the plane's speaker system. It was the captain, and what he had to say would change everything about this flight. The captain's voice came through the speakers clear and firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay in our departure. Please remain in your seats while our flight crew handles the situation." Patricia's face showed a mix of triumph and anger. She clearly thought the captain's announcement meant she was winning this battle. She turned her phone to get a better recording angle of Marcus, who still stood calmly in the aisle. "See," she said loudly. "Now we'll get this sorted out. I don't know how you got a first-class ticket, but standards on this airline have clearly dropped." She emphasized the word standards while looking Marcus up and down, making her meaning very clear to everyone watching. Marcus slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his FBI badge and ID card. The gold badge caught the light from the plane's windows, and several passengers gasped softly. "Ma'am," he said quietly but firmly, "I'm going to show you my credentials one more time. I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, returning from an official operation in Atlanta." The young woman across the aisle, who had been recording everything, whispered to her seatmate, "This is going viral for sure." Her phone kept recording as Patricia's behavior got worse. "Anyone can buy a fake badge online," Patricia snapped, her voice getting even louder. She was now standing up, but still blocking the way to the window seat. "I know all about those scams. My company deals with high-level security, and I lead a team of 50 people. Sarah Chen, the lead flight attendant, returned with the second in command from the cockpit. Ma'am, the flight officer said, I verified this gentleman's credentials. He is indeed an FBI agent, and that is his assigned seat. You need to let him access his seat immediately. But Patricia was too far into her rant to stop now. She opened her designer handbag and pulled out a business card, waving it around. I'm the vice president of sales at Maxwell Communications. We spend millions on airline tickets every year. I've been a platinum member for 15 years. Her voice was now so loud that people in economy class were standing up to see what was happening. Marcus maintained his professional composure, though anyone looking closely could see his jaw tightening slightly. He'd spent years dealing with high-pressure situations, but this was testing even his patience. The retired judge in row 2, Robert Martinez, spoke up again. Young man, he said to Marcus, I want you to know that I'm recording this too. What this woman is doing is not just rude. It's a clear case of discrimination. I spent 30 years on the federal bench, and I know it when I see it. Patricia spun around to face Judge Martinez. How dare you? This has nothing to do with. I'm not. This is about standards in first class. I paid $4,000 for this seat. Her designer handbag fell to the floor as she gestured wildly, spilling its contents. More passengers had their phones out now. A businesswoman in row 1 was typing rapidly on her laptop. And people would later discover she was a reporter for the Washington Post. The story was already taking shape in her mind. Discrimination at 30,000 feet. FBI agent faces racism in first class. The atmosphere in the cabin grew more tense with each passing moment. Economy passengers trying to board were stuck in the jet bridge, creating a long line. The flight was now officially delayed. Sarah Chen spoke quietly into her radio again, and seconds later, the cabin doors opened. 2 air marshals stepped into the plane, their badges visible on their belts. They moved quickly to row 3, their faces serious. Patricia saw them and suddenly changed her tone, though she kept recording with her phone. I'm the victim here, she announced to everyone. I'm being harassed. I'm going to sue this airline. I'm going to sue the FBI. I know people in Washington who. The air marshals exchanged looks. They'd seen this type of behavior before, but rarely so blatant, and never directed at a fellow federal agent. They stepped closer to row 3, and what they would say next would give this story its next shocking turn. The 2 air marshals positioned themselves on either side of row 3. Ma'am, the taller marshal said, I'm Air Marshal Johnson, and this is Air Marshal Rivera. We need you to stop recording and listen carefully to what we're about to say. Patricia's hand holding the phone shook slightly, but she kept recording. I'm exercising my rights, she declared, though her voice wasn't as confident as before. Everyone needs to see how I'm being treated. The shorter air marshal, Rivera, spoke next. His voice was calm but carried authority. Ma'am, interfering with an aircraft crew is a federal offense. So is harassing a federal agent. Right now, you're doing both. The whole first-class cabin was silent now. Even the children a few rows back had stopped playing their games to watch. The Washington Post reporter in row 1 had switched from her laptop to her phone, recording everything. Sarah Chen stepped forward with a printout in her hand. For the record, she said clearly, I'm going to state what has happened. At 2:47 p.m., you refused to allow a ticketed passenger to access his assigned seat. At 2:49 p.m., you began making discriminatory comments. At 2:52 p.m., you started recording without consent. At 2:55 p.m., you claimed FBI credentials were fake. Would you like me to continue? Patricia's face went from red to pale. She looked around for support, but found none. Even the expensive-looking businessman sitting across from her was shaking his head disapprovingly. Judge Martinez stood up slowly, his gray hair and dignified appearance drawing everyone's attention. Young lady, he said to Patricia, I've presided over many discrimination cases in my career. What you're doing here today is textbook harassment with clear racial undertones. In my court, such behavior often led to serious consequences. Marcus, who had remained standing quietly this whole time, finally spoke. I don't want to press charges, he said softly. I just want to get home to my family. His words made Patricia look even more uncomfortable as they reminded everyone that he was just a person trying to get home after doing his job. Suddenly, a new voice spoke up from the back of first class. "I'm Dr. Regina Carter from the Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund," a woman in a gray suit announced. "I've recorded this entire incident, and I want to state clearly that we will be happy to take this case if Agent Thompson changes his mind about pressing charges." Air Marshal Johnson nodded to his partner. "Ma'am," he said to Patricia, "you have two options right now. One, you can gather your belongings and leave this aircraft voluntarily. Two, we can remove you from the aircraft, and you'll be detained for questioning about interfering with a flight crew and harassing a federal agent." Patricia's hands were trembling now. Her phone had dropped to her lap, though it was still recording. Her earlier confidence had disappeared completely. My presentation," she stuttered. "I have to be in D.C. tonight. I'm leading a major client meeting tomorrow morning." Sarah Chen stepped forward again. "Ma'am, your choice needs to be made now. We have passengers waiting to board, and we're already behind schedule." The entire plane waited for Patricia's response. In economy class, passengers were standing in the aisle, trying to see what was happening in first class. The story was already spreading through the plane via text messages and social media. Patricia looked at her phone, which was still recording. The screen showed that she had been live streaming the entire incident to her company's social media group. Her eyes widened as she saw the number of viewers and the stream of angry comments from her own colleagues. I, she started to say, but was interrupted by a notification on her phone. It was an email from her company's HR department, marked ORGNT. Immediate response required. The air marshals moved closer, and what happened next would shock everyone on the plane, even those who thought they had seen everything in this 20-minute confrontation that had already gone viral across social media. Patricia's phone suddenly started buzzing with notifications. Her hands shook as she read the urgent email from HR. The message was short but clear. "Due to multiple reports of a live-streamed incident, you are immediately suspended pending investigation. Do not represent Maxwell Communications in D.C. tomorrow." Her face turned ghostly white. She had forgotten that she was live streaming to the company's social media group, where over 500 employees, including the CEO, could watch her behavior in real time. The comments section was flooding with messages from shocked coworkers. "I didn't mean..." Patricia's voice cracked as she looked up at the air marshals. The reality of what she had done was finally hitting her. Her designer bag lay forgotten on the floor, its contents still scattered. Marcus Thompson, still standing calmly in the aisle, noticed a photo that had fallen from her bag. It showed Patricia with two young men who appeared to be college students. One of the young men was black. It was a happy photo, probably her sons or nephews, and it made the situation even more sad and strange. The young influencer across the aisle, whose name was Jenny Park and who had 2 million followers on social media, spoke up. "I've been live streaming too," she said. "My followers are asking why you thought it was okay to treat an FBI agent this way just because of his race." Patricia tried to defend herself. "This isn't about, my son's roommate is." She stopped talking as she realized she was only making things worse. Judge Martinez shook his head sadly from his seat. Sarah Chen, the lead flight attendant, checked her watch. The flight was now delayed by 45 minutes. "Ma'am," she said firmly, "we need your final decision. Will you leave the aircraft voluntarily, or do the air marshals need to remove you?" More notifications popped up on Patricia's phone. Her LinkedIn profile was already getting negative comments. The video was spreading across different social media platforms. Someone had identified Maxwell Communications, and people were tagging the company in their angry posts. Dr. Regina Carter from the Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund stood up again. "For the record," she said clearly, "I've documented at least 7 discriminatory statements made in the last 30 minutes. This will make an excellent teaching case for corporate sensitivity training." The Washington Post reporter had finished her first draft and was ready to submit it to her editor. The headline read, "Corporate Executives Mile-High Discrimination Caught on Camera. FBI Agent Faces Racial Profiling in First Class." Marcus finally spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. "Ma'am, I've been an FBI agent for 12 years. I protected people of all backgrounds, including people who looked at me the same way you did today. All I want is to get home to my daughter's science fair tonight." His words seemed to break something in Patricia. Tears started rolling down her cheeks, smearing her expensive makeup. She looked at her phone again. Now her sister was calling. Her sister, who was always telling her to think before she spoke, to be more understanding, to stop living in the past. The air marshals moved closer. "Time's up, ma'am," Marshal Johnson said. "What's your decision?" Patricia looked around the cabin one last time. She saw the phones recording her, the disapproving faces, the hurt she had caused. Through the windows, she could see more police cars arriving at the gate. Her career, her reputation, everything she had worked for over 20 years was crumbling, all because she couldn't stop herself from showing her prejudice. She began, her voice barely a whisper. But before she could finish her sentence, her phone buzzed one final time. It was a message that would change this story's direction completely. A text from Maxwell Communications CEO himself. The message was only 3 words long, but it made Patricia's legs so weak that she had to grab the seat to stay standing. The other passengers leaned forward, wondering what would happen next in this real-life drama that had turned a routine flight into a viral moment of social justice. The text message from Maxwell Communications CEO was direct. "You're fired. Immediately." Patricia's phone slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered to the floor, its screen still showing the message that had just destroyed her career. "I'll leave," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'll get off the plane." The air marshals nodded and moved to help her collect her scattered belongings from the floor. Her designer bags, which had seemed so important earlier, now looked meaningless as she stuffed them with shaking hands. The Washington Post reporter was already updating her story. Breaking: executive fired mid-flight after discriminatory incident. Her fingers flew across her phone's keyboard, adding details about the CEO's swift action. As Patricia stood up, her legs unsteady, Sarah Chen stepped forward with a clipboard. "Ma'am, before you leave, I need to inform you that you are now on our airline's no-fly list. This means you cannot book tickets on any of our flights or our partnered airlines." The other passengers watched in silence as Patricia's face crumpled. She had flown over 100,000 miles each year for the past 15 years. The airline's platinum card had been one of her most prized possessions. Now, like her job, it was gone. Jenny Park, the influencer, was still recording. "My followers want to know if you have anything to say to Agent Thompson before you leave," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle despite everything that had happened. Patricia turned to look at Marcus, who had maintained his dignified stance throughout the entire incident. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could she say to make up for what she had done? The air marshals gently but firmly guided her toward the front of the plane. As they walked, Judge Martinez spoke one last time. "Let this be a lesson," he said clearly. "In 2025, there are consequences for discrimination. The world is watching, and the world is changing." Patricia stumbled slightly as she walked through first class. Her phone was still buzzing with notifications. News agencies were already calling for comments. She could see police officers waiting at the gate through the plane's windows. Just before she reached the door, Marcus's voice stopped her. "Ma'am," he said quietly. Everyone in the cabin held their breath, wondering what the FBI agent would say to the woman who had humiliated him. "I hope you learn from this," he said. "Not because you got caught, not because you lost your job, but because understanding and respecting each other is the right thing to do. My daughter asks me every day if the world is getting better. I'd like to tell her yes." Tears streamed down Patricia's face as Air Marshal Johnson guided her off the plane. Through the windows, passengers could see police officers meeting her in the jet bridge. She would later learn that the airport police wanted to question her about possible criminal charges. As the cabin door closed behind Patricia, spontaneous applause broke out among the passengers. Sarah Chen quickly restored order and began preparing for departure. The economy class passengers, who had been watching everything from the aisle, finally started moving to their seats. Marcus sat down in his window seat, 3A, the seat that had started it all. Judge Martinez turned around and handed him a business card. "If you decide to file charges," he said, "call me. What happened here today needs to be documented." Dr. Regina Carter was already writing an email to her colleagues at the Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund. This incident would become a case study in their corporate training programs. The Washington Post reporter's story was already getting its first online comments. Jenny Park's live stream had reached over 500,000 viewers. And that's what happens when you mess around and find out in 2025, she told her followers as she ended her recording. Racism has consequences. As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, nearly an hour late, Marcus looked out the window. He took out his phone and sent a message to his daughter. On my way home. And yes, sweetie, the world is getting better, one day at a time. 1 week after the airplane incident, Marcus Thompson sat at his desk in the FBI office, looking at his computer screen. The video of what happened on the plane had been viewed more than 50 million times across different social media platforms. His phone had hundreds of messages from people calling him a hero. Agent Thompson. His secretary knocked on his door. CNN is calling again. They want you to appear on their morning show. Marcus shook his head politely. He had already turned down interviews from 20 different TV channels. He didn't want to be famous. He just wanted to do his job. On his desk was that morning's copy of the Washington Post. The newspaper had done a big story about how the airline industry deals with discrimination. There was a picture of Marcus in his FBI jacket, looking professional as always. The article praised him for staying calm during the incident. His phone buzzed with a text from Jenny Park, the influencer who had recorded everything. Her video had helped her gain another 1 million followers. Hey Agent T, her message read. You've inspired so many people. My followers want to know if you'll start your own social media channel about fighting discrimination. Marcus smiled but didn't reply. Instead, he opened an email that had just arrived from Dr. Regina Carter at the Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund. They were using the plane incident video in their training programs for big companies. Already, 3 major airlines had asked for special training sessions for their staff. Meanwhile, across town, Patricia's life had changed completely. She sat in her empty home office, staring at her laptop. The screen showed hundreds of job rejection emails. No company wanted to hire someone whose discrimination had gone viral. Her LinkedIn profile had lost thousands of connections. The news about Patricia had gotten worse over the week. People had found old posts and comments she had made, showing that this wasn't the first time she had treated people badly because of their race. Her own sons had posted public messages saying they were ashamed of their mother's behavior. Back at the FBI office, Marcus's boss called him in for a meeting. Thompson, the director, said, "What you get on that plane? You showed everyone what an FBI agent should be. We're making your response part of our training program. Would you be willing to speak to new agents about it?" Marcus thought about it. He hadn't pressed charges against Patricia, even though Judge Martinez and Dr. Carter had offered to help. He believed that sometimes the best punishment was having to face the consequences of your own actions in public. Sarah Chen, the flight attendant, had also become a minor celebrity. The airline had promoted her to lead trainer for their new anti-discrimination program. Your calm handling of the situation was perfect, her boss had told her. We want all our staff to learn from you. The airline industry was changing because of what happened. 3 major airlines announced new rules about recording and reporting discrimination on planes. They created a shared no-fly list for passengers who showed racist behavior. Patricia's name was one of the first on that list. Jenny Park's followers had started a positive trend on social media. They shared stories about standing up against discrimination in public places. The hashtag #BeLikeAgentThompson was trending, with people posting about staying calm and professional when facing prejudice. Marcus's daughter had won first prize at her science fair. The local news came to cover the story, not because of her project, but because she was Agent Thompson's daughter. She told the reporter, "My dad says being kind is more important than being right." He showed everyone that on the plane. Judge Martinez had written a legal article about the incident. He explained how social media and quick action from companies were creating new ways to fight discrimination. The article was now required reading in several law schools. As Marcus finished reading his emails that morning, he saw a letter that made him pause. It was from Patricia's son, Michael. "Dear Agent Thompson," it began. "Thank you for showing my mother a better way to be. She's finally getting help to change." The incident had started conversations across the country about racism, consequences, and the power of staying dignified under pressure. Marcus had shown that sometimes the quietest response could make the loudest statement. 3 months after the plane incident, Marcus Thompson stood at a podium in a large conference room at the Marriott Hotel in Washington, D.C. He was giving a speech about respect and dignity to over 500 business executives. In the middle of the audience sat Patricia, looking very different from the angry woman on the plane. Patricia had spent these 3 months going through intensive sensitivity training. She had lost her high-paying job and her reputation, but she had gained something more important: understanding. Her hair was simpler now, her designer clothes replaced by a modest blue suit. Discrimination doesn't just hurt the person being targeted, Marcus said to the quiet room. It hurts everyone. It hurts our communities, our workplaces, and our country. But change is possible if we're willing to learn from our mistakes. In the front row, Jenny Park was recording again, but this time with permission. Her social media followers had watched Patricia's journey from that terrible day on the plane to today. Many people had criticized Jenny for giving Patricia a platform, but she believed in showing how people could change. Dr. Regina Carter from the Civil Rights Legal Defense Funds stood up to speak next. What happened on that plane could have ended with just another angry video on social media, she said. Instead, it became a teaching moment that has reached millions of people. The conference room screens showed clips from that day, Patricia's angry words, Marcus's calm responses, the support from other passengers. But now these clips were part of a larger presentation about fighting discrimination in the workplace. Companies across America were using this story to train their employees. Sarah Chen, who had been promoted to the airline's chief training officer, was also there. She shared how the airline industry had changed. In the past 3 months, reports of discrimination on flights have dropped by 60%, she said. People know they're being watched, and they know there are real consequences. Judge Martinez sat in the audience, too. He had helped create new guidelines for how companies should handle discrimination cases. The law has always been clear about discrimination, he told the crowd. But now social media makes sure everyone is held accountable for their actions. When it was Patricia's turn to speak, her hands shook as she walked to the podium. The room was silent. Everyone had seen the video of her behavior. Many had shared it and commented on it. Now they waited to hear what she would say. 3 months ago, I was that person you all saw on the video, she began, her voice trembling. I was someone who thought my money and position gave me the right to judge others. I lost everything because of my prejudice, my job, my reputation, my self-respect. She looked at Marcus as she continued. But I gained something too. I learned that true character isn't about what you wear, how much money you make, or what seat you sit in on a plane. It's about how you treat others. Patricia's sons were in the audience. They had stopped talking to her after the incident but slowly reconnected as they saw her working to change. Her younger son, whose college roommate was black, had helped her understand her biases through long, honest conversations. At the end of the conference, Marcus and Patricia stood together for a photo. It wasn't for publicity. It was to show that change was possible. The picture would later be used in textbooks about corporate responsibility and social justice. The best apology is changed behavior, Marcus said as people came up to talk to them. This phrase had become famous after the incident, appearing on T-shirts and posters about anti-discrimination. As the conference ended, a young flight attendant trainee asked Patricia what advice she would give to others. Patricia thought for a moment before answering. Watch that video of me on the plane, she said quietly. Watch it and remember that arrogance and prejudice can destroy everything you've worked for. But also remember that it's never too late to learn and change. Marcus's daughter had written about this story for her school newspaper. Her article ended with words that summed up everything perfectly. My dad always says that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes. What happened on that plane was bad, but the changes it created were good. That's how progress happens, one person at a time.